In this film, we're going to have a look at how to add a vintage style reverb to a basic synth sound. Let's just play this project, which is incredibly sparse right now. It just features this pluck synth part and a kick drum. So you can hear that there are some effects on this pluck sound. There's a delay, which you can hear very obviously at the end, and there's a little bit of space in it as well. It's just a basic patch from Omnisphere. But what I want to do is to add a reverb treatment to it, which feels much more sort of vintage based, much more sort of old sounding and retro. We've talked in the past a lot about how effective it can be to add detune to synth sounds to give them more space within a mix. And we can apply the same principle with reverb as well by adding a sort of space of sound which nevertheless has some sort of pitch differential in it, so that rather than simply echoing and providing reverberant taps of a sound within a normal sounding space, we can create a sort of vintage effect, almost something that sounds like old tape, by adding some modulation of pitch. And to do that, what I'm going to do is to set up an auxiliary bus here, and I'm going to set up Valhalla's VintageVerb, which will allow us to achieve something along those lines. So within this reverb plugin, what I've got a chance to do is to set usual parameters like decay time. I've got damping control over frequencies. I'm just going to make that a little bit brighter actually. And we're going to lessen off the amount of damp. Let's just take that down to sort of about 12 dB per octave rather than the standard minus 24. So we've got a slightly brighter sound than we would. But in particular, what I'm interested in is this modulation section here. Now, what I've got a chance to do here is to add a rate, a bit like an LFO speed, and then a depth. And in order to really understand what this is doing, what I'm going to do is to solo this reverb so we can just hear it completely by itself. And I'll just mute the kick drum for now as well. And we should just hear the reverb by itself. And I'm just going to dial in a different amount of depth so we can hear how this effect works. And particularly at the end there, you can hear it wobbling a lot. So it's too fast and there's also too much of it. But just a little bit of this blended in with the original sound. Let's just unsolo this auxiliary and just hear the pluck sound now, both the dry and this vintage treatment as well. So that's nice, but we've still got a very sort of pleasing, pleasant, concert hall-y type sound. What I'm more interested in is something which has just got a little bit of bite to it. So I'm going to try this dirty plate instead, make the decay time a little bit less, and we'll just make sure that we've got a similar amount of modulation going on. And we'll just play the very end of this file just so we can hear it going off into silence at the end and see how this decay phase works. And that's working really nicely. So what I'm going to do now is just add a sort of an extra little element by bringing in this kick drum, but also just going back to the reverb and putting a compressor after it, just so we can feed in. I'm just going to use Logic's compressor, but any compressor with a sidechain input will do. And what I'm going to do is to feed in the pluck sound as a source, turn off auto gain. I don't want the compressor adding extra gain. And we'll just try a little bit more ratio. I'm just going to get this sound to this reverb treatment just to sort of pump a little bit. Again, let's just solo it so we can hear exactly what's going on. So I've just swapped over the input source there. Rather than using the pluck, I'm using the kick drum now just as the sidechain input source. Now, I personally don't want this to be a sort of super sort of housey style, sucky compression treatment, but you could go for that if you wanted to. I want something just a little bit subtle, as it's just going to get a little bit of dynamic change running through it alongside those pitch changes too. Let's try the whole thing now. So it's interesting just to compare and contrast, so hence muting the return. Now the only other thing to try here as well is that this sound, this Omnisphere patch, has cutoff linked to the mod wheel. So what I'm going to do is just draw in a quick mod wheel line, just so the sound gets brighter as it plays back. And we'll just see how the reverb responds to additional brightness. So if we start with the filter closed as it is, pretty much as we're listening to it at the moment, and we'll just put in a couple of extra marks here and just have the second half of it open up, and it'll be interesting to see how the sort of warped, pitchy reverb that we've constructed responds as the sound gets brighter. And in a world where sort of impulse responses and convolution reverbs of really sort of well-modelled, accurate spaces sort of now rule the roost, it's really nice to go back to a sort of reverb that feels like it's a bit sort of older and more retro, and pitch modulation is a really nice way to achieve that.